My name is Wayne Dargis. Each gospel writer has something to say about Jesus before the Sanhedrin and Peter's 3 denials. What you're looking at is the 4 accounts side by side, so I can show you how to read these accounts horizontally in order to get a single account. To do this, I'll only use the verses seen here and not add or delete words. So I'm going to read the 4 Gospels horizontally in a single account. And led him away to Annas first, for he was father-in-law to Caiaphas, which was the high priest that same year. Now Caiaphas was he which gave counsel to the Jews, that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. That disciple was known unto the high priest, and went in with Jesus into the palace of the high priest. But Peter stood at the door without. Then went out that other disciple, which was known unto the high priest, and spake unto her that kept the door, and brought in Peter. And when they had kindled the fire in the midst of the hall, and the servants and the officers stood there, who had made a fire of coals, for it was cold. And they warmed themselves, and Peter stood with them and warmed himself, and sat with the servants to see the end. And as Peter was beneath in the palace, the damsel that kept the door, one of the maids of the high priest, beheld him as he sat by the fire, and earnestly looked upon him, saying, Thou also wast with Jesus of Galilee. And he denied him, saying, Woman, I know him not. I know not what thou sayest. And about the space of 1 hour, and when he was gone out into the porch, and the cock crew, and the maid saw him again, and began to say to them that stood by, This fellow was also with Jesus of Nazareth. They that stood by said again to Peter, Surely thou art one of them, for thou art a Galilean, and thy speech agreeth thereto. After another confidently affirmed, saying, Of a truth this fellow also is with them, for he is a Galilean. And again he denied it with an oath. He began to curse and to swear, saying, I know not this man of whom ye speak. The high priest then asked Jesus of his disciples and of his doctrine. Jesus answered him, I spake openly to the world. I even taught in the synagogue, and in the temple, whither the Jews always resort, and in secret have I said nothing. Why askest thou me? Ask them which heard me, what I have said unto them. Behold, they know what I said. And when he had thus spoken, one of the officers which stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hands, saying, Answer thou the high priest so? Jesus answered him, If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why smithest thou me? Now Annas had sent him bound unto the high priest. One of the servants of the high priest, being his kinsman, whose ear Peter cut off, saith, Did not I see thee in the garden with him? Peter then denied again. And Peter said, Man, I know not, neither understand I what thou sayest. And immediately, while he yet spake, and the second time the cock crew. And the Lord turned, and looked upon Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said unto him, Before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And Peter went out and wept bitterly. And they that had laid hold on Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest. And the men that held Jesus mocked him and smote him. And when they had blindfolded him, they struck him on the face, and asked him, saying, Prophesy, who is it that smote thee? And many other things blasphemingly spake they against him. And as soon as it was day, the elders of the people, and the chief priests and the scribes came together, and led him into their council, saying, Art thou the Christ? Tell us. And he said unto them, If I tell you, ye will not believe. And if I also ask you, ye will not answer me, nor let me go. Now the chief priests and elders and all the council sought false witness against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. For many bare witness against him, but their witnesses agreed not together. At the last came 2 false witnesses. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another made without hands. But neither so did their witness agree together. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, saying, Answered thou nothing? What is it which these witness against thee? And he held his peace and answered nothing. And the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee by the living God that thou tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God, the Son of the Blessed. And Jesus said, I am. Nevertheless, I say unto you, hereafter shall ye see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of the power, and coming in the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest rent his clothes, saying, He hath spoken blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses? Behold, now ye have heard his blasphemy. What think ye? They answered and said, He is guilty of death. Then they did spit in his face, and buffeted him, and others smote him with the palms of their hands. And the servants did strike him with the palms of their hands. So after collecting all the verses from the 4 Gospels that I've read, I put all the verses in a single column and grouped them under these headings. Jesus taken to Annas, Peter's first denial, Peter's second denial, Jesus before Annas, Peter's third denial, Jesus is beaten, Jesus before Caiaphas, the false witnesses. Are you the Christ, the Son of God? The verdict of the Sanhedrin. I'm going to do a verse-by-verse Bible study starting with Jesus taken to Annas. I'd like to cover 4 points. John 18, verse 13. And led him away to Annas first, for he was father-in-law to Caiaphas, which was the high priest that same year. Led him away to Annas first. The Romans deposed Annas as high priest for corruption. Instead, they appointed Caiaphas to be the new high priest. Caiaphas was the son-in-law of Annas, but everyone regarded Annas as the true high priest. He became the real religious power behind the scenes. When Jesus was arrested, he was taken to Annas first for questioning. Animals for sacrifice. Annas, the former high priest, had a monopoly on the sale of animals for sacrifice. Annas and Sadducees owned land and hired shepherds to raise sheep. These sheep had to be without blemish. They used the temple treasury to buy their sheep at a high price. This money went directly into their pockets. This made huge profits for them and their families. And Annas controlled the selling of these animals for sacrifices. He installed stalls to sell the animals to the public. He installed them in the courtyard of the Gentiles, worship site for Gentiles. The stalls were called the booths of Annas. Annas controlled the temple inspectors. Animals for sacrifice had to be without blemish. Animals outside the temple or neighboring towns were less money. But the inspectors declared that these animals had blemish. So the worshippers were blackmailed into paying excessive prices. The lowest of sacrifices were doves and pigeons. Annas charged the poor extra money for doves and pigeons. All the money went directly into the temple treasury, from which he took his huge salary and the salaries for the Sadducees. Money exchangers. Annas also had a monopoly on the exchanging of money. Payment for buying temple animals for sacrifice had to be in shekels. People of the day only used Roman money, and Jews from all parts of the world brought foreign money. So money had to be exchanged to buy the animals in shekels. Annas made extra money by levying a rate of exchange. He also levied an exchange rate for the temple tax. This tax had to be also paid in shekels, and not just in Jerusalem, but in other surrounding areas like Judea and Galilee, etc. Annas and the Sadducees became extremely wealthy. Gentile worshippers. So Gentiles could only worship and pray in the courtyard of Gentiles, with the lowing of the oxen, bleating of sheep, cooing of the doves, shoutings of the hucksters, rattle of coins of the money exchangers, voices raised in bargaining disputes. How could they pray sincerely under these horrible conditions? John 18, verse 14. Now Caiaphas was he which gave counsel to the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. After Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, Caiaphas revealed a prophecy that God gave him. The chief priests and Pharisees called a special meeting of the Sanhedrin. Jesus had done many miraculous signs and now raised Lazarus from the dead. If Jesus was allowed to continue, the Romans will come upon them. The Romans would take away both their place and nation. Now this is the King James Version. Other translations are take away both our place and our nation, take away both our temple and our nation, destroy both our holy place and our nation, take away our position in our nation, destroy both our temple and our nation. The chief priests and Pharisees wanted to know what they were going to do. Caiaphas was the high priest at the time. He said that it was better that Jesus should die for the people than destroy a nation. He didn't say this on his own. He was led to prophecy by God. John 18, verse 49. And one of them, named Caiaphas, being the high priest, that same year said unto them, Ye know nothing at all, nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not. And spake he not of himself, but being the high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus should die for that nation. And not for the nation only, but that also he should gather together in one the children of God that were scattered abroad. Then from that day forth they took counsel together to put him to death. Now King James uses gather together in one the children of God that were scattered abroad. Other translations, gather into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. Gather together into one the children of God who are scattered abroad. The scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. Gather into one the dispersed children of God. Bring God's scattered children together and make them one. Bring together and unite all the children of God scattered around the world. The prophecy. Caiaphas interpreted the prophecy for his own political gain and purpose. Jesus had to die so that the whole nation of Israel not perish and be saved. Jesus would die as a substitutionary sacrifice for the nation of Israel. And if this was God's will, Caiaphas would ensure God's will be done. But Caiaphas did not understand the spiritual side of the prophecy. Jesus had to die to save people from their sins for access to eternal life. Jesus would die as a substitutionary sacrifice for the sins of the world. And this was not just for people in Jerusalem, but for the whole world. And God used Caiaphas as his instrument to accomplish the death of Jesus. It was God that was paving the way to this end, not Caiaphas. John 18, verse 15. And Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. That disciple was known unto the high priest, and went in with Jesus into the palace of the high priest. So did another disciple. Here are some speculations as to who this disciple was. John, son of Zebedee, early church tradition, who wrote about this event. Judas Iscariot, hired by the chief priests who betrayed Jesus. Nicodemus, secret disciple, who was a member of the Sanhedrin. Joseph of Arimathea, secret disciple, who was a member of the Sanhedrin. Personal friend of Annas, secret disciple. An important servant or guard of Annas, secret disciple. John 18, verse 16. But Peter stood at the door without. Then went out that other disciple, which was known unto the high priest, and spake unto her that kept the door, and brought in Peter. Spake unto her that kept the door. This was a female servant, a maid, who was the gatekeeper of Annas' courtyard. On the word of the other disciple, she allowed Peter to enter the courtyard. But later, she studied Peter keeping warm by the fire with the guards. She was the first person to accuse Peter. Peter's first denial. I'd like to make 3 points. Luke 22, verse 55a. And when they had kindled the fire in the midst of the hall, and the servants and the officers stood there, who had made a fire of coals, for it was cold. And they warmed themselves, and Peter stood with them and warmed himself. Who had made a fire of coals. That's the King James. Other translations, the servants and officers had made a charcoal fire. The slaves and officers were standing there, having made a charcoal fire. The servants and officers stood around the fire they had made. The slaves and the police had made a charcoal fire. The servants and the guards were standing around the fire they had built. The household servants, guards, had made a charcoal fire. John 18, verse 17b. The damsel that kept the door one of the maids of the high priest, beheld him as he sat by the fire, and earnestly looked upon him, saying, Thou also wast with Jesus of Galilee. Now, the King James, the damsel that kept the door. Other translation, the servant girl at the door, the slave woman who was the doorkeeper, the servant girl on duty there, the woman who guarded the gate, the woman who was the gatekeeper, the woman watched at the gate. The primary role of the gatekeeper was to protect the property and the people inside. But something about Peter disturbed the woman guarding the gate. Was Peter there to break Jesus out, or maybe hurt the people in her household? So she earnestly stared at him by the light of the fire to make sure. Finally, the gatekeeper challenged Peter if he was with Jesus of Galilee. She used the title Jesus of Galilee. The second woman used Jesus of Nazareth. Either way, he knew something about Jesus. Luke 22, verse 57. And he denied him, saying, Woman, I know him not. I know not what thou sayest. So, woman, I know him not. Peter demonstrated courage by his presence in a hostile environment. But his courage failed him when confronted. When his personal safety was threatened and at risk, he quickly denied Jesus. Now, the King James Version uses, and he denied him, saying, Woman, I know him not. Other translations. But he denied it, saying, Woman, I do not know him. But he denied it, saying, I do not know him, woman. But he denied it, Woman, I don't know him. But Peter denied it by saying, I don't know him, woman. But Peter denied him, Woman, he said, I do not even know him. Luke 22, verse 59. In about the space of 1 hour, and when he was gone out into the porch, the cock crew. The space of 1 hour, a cock crew. Now the King James uses the cock crew. Other translations, the rooster crowed. Now, interesting, the NASB and NIV, they don't mention the rooster crowing. The cock crowed, a rooster crowed. Supposedly, the Sanhedrin didn't allow chickens and roosters in Jerusalem. The Sanhedrin found these birds dirty, filthy, and disgusting. They didn't want these birds polluting the holy temple area. The 4 watches of the night. Jesus said, Mark 13, verse 35, Watch ye therefore, for ye know not when the master of the house cometh, at eve, or at midnight, or at the cock crowing, or in the morning. During the night, Roman soldiers had 4 watches. First watch, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. This was the early evening watch. Second watch, 9 p.m. to midnight. This was the evening watch, or, as Jesus mentioned, eve watch. Third watch, midnight to 3 a.m., the midnight watch. Fourth watch, 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. This was the cock crowing watch. To announce each watch, the Romans used a bugler heard loudly throughout Jerusalem. The bugle was called the bucina, circular horn, which had a distinct and unique sound. When the bugler blew the bucina, soldiers knew that it was time to change the guard. And because the bugler announced the cock crowing watch, he earned a nickname. The bugler earned the nickname of Rooster or Cock. Matthew and Luke mention that Peter will deny Jesus 3 times before the start of the cock crowing watch. But Mark gives us a little extra detail as to the time. When the bugler blew his horn, the cock crew, it was midnight. And an hour had passed before the midnight watch started. So Jesus was brought to Annas between around 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. Mark 14, verse 69a. And the maids saw him again, and began to say to them that stood by, This fellow was also with Jesus of Nazareth. They that stood by said again to Peter, Surely thou art one of them, for thou art a Galilean, and thy speech agreeth thereto. After another confidently affirmed, saying, Of a truth this fellow also was with him, for he is a Galilean. Now, the King James uses, For thou art a Galilean, thy speech agrees thereto. Other translations, Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean. You really are one of them, for you are a Galilean as well. Surely you are one of them, you are a Galilean. It's obvious you're one of them, you're a Galilean. You must be one of them, because you are a Galilean. Matthew 26, verse 72a. And again he denied with an oath. He began to curse and to swear, saying, I know not this man of whom ye speak. Now the King James Version uses, and again he denied with an oath. The other translations, and again he denied it with an oath. He denied it again with an oath. Again he denied it with an oath. Peter denied it and swore with an oath. And Peter denied it this time with an oath. Now the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus had something to say about do not swear an oath. And I'll just let you pause and you can read the verse for yourself. Matthew 26, verse 72b. And again he denied with an oath. He began to curse and to swear, saying, I know not this man of whom ye speak. He began to curse and to swear. That's the King James. Other translations are, but he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear. And he began to curse himself and to swear. He began to call down curses, and he swore to them. But he began to curse, and he swore an oath. Then Peter began to curse and swear with an oath. Peter swore, a curse on me if I'm lying. Jesus before Annas. I'd like to cover 4 points. John 18, verse 19. The high priest then asked Jesus of his disciples and of his doctrine. Annas probably asked Jesus by what authority or right to recruit disciples, to form a different sect, to preach a new doctrine, to set himself up as a public reformer. As the legal high priest of God, Annas was making himself the proper judge over Jesus. John 18, verse 20. Jesus answered him, I spake openly to the world. I ever taught in the synagogues and in the temple, where the Jews always resort, and in secret places have I said nothing. Why askest thou me? Ask them which hurt me, what I have said unto them. Behold, they know what I spake. I spake openly to the world. Jesus claimed he only spoke openly to Jews. He taught openly in synagogues, in all towns and villages. He taught in the temple and had no secret school. And his high priests and Pharisees had watched and questioned Jesus. The only doctrine preached was the righteousness of the law and the purity of God. And the disciples of Jesus preached the same. Jesus asked Annas why he was asking questions to answers he already knew. John 18, verse 22. And when he had thus spoken, one of the officers who stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hands, saying, Answerest thou the high priest so? Jesus answered him, If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why smitest thou me? One of the officers which stood by struck Jesus. This was an outrage to all justice for a prisoner before he was condemned. Prisoners were considered to be under the protection of the law. No one had the right to hit or hurt the prisoner according to the law. The guard had hit Jesus before the trial found him guilty. Now King James says, If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why smitest thou me? The other translations, If what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me? If I have spoken wrongly, testify of the wrong. But if righteously, why do you strike me? If I said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me? If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me? If I said anything wrong, tell me what it was. But if I told the truth, why do you hit me? If I said anything wrong, you must prove it. But if I'm speaking the truth, why are you beating me? John 18, verse 24. Now Annas had sent him bound unto the high priest. Once the interview was over, Jesus was bound and sent to Caiaphas, the official high priest, as selected by the Romans. Peter's third denial. I'd like to cover 4 points. John 18, verse 26. One of the servants of the high priest, being his kinsman, whose ear Peter cut off, saith, Did not I see thou in the garden with him? Peter then denied again. And Peter said, Man, I know not, neither understand of what thou sayest. Being his kinsman, whose ear Peter cut off. So John 18:10 said, Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it, and smote the high priest's servant, and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. A kinsman of Malchus, who was a witness, challenged Peter about being with Jesus in the garden. Peter denied he was with Jesus in the garden. He simply said he didn't know what the kinsman was talking about. Luke 22, verse 60c. And immediately, when he yet spake, and the second time the cock crew. When the bugler, cock crew, blew his horn at 3 a.m. in the morning, the fourth watch had started. This watch was called the cock crowing watch. It was a 3-hour period before sunrise. Jesus was brought before Annas 1 hour before the cock crew, the midnight watch. When the midnight watch, 3 hours ended, Jesus was with Annas at least 4 hours. Only Mark mentions the cock crowing twice, as Jesus was before Annas. Luke 22, verse 61. And the Lord turned and looked upon Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said unto him, Before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And Peter went out and wept bitterly. The soldiers brought Jesus into the courtyard before leaving to go to Caiaphas, which means Jesus heard Peter's denial, and moments later the cock crew, and Peter saw Jesus turn and look at him. When Peter saw Jesus, he remembered what Jesus had said to him. Before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. That's the King James. The other translations are, before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. Deny me 3 times. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. Before the cock crows today, you will deny me 3 times. Before the rooster crows today, you will say 3 times that you don't know me. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you ever knew me. Jesus is beaten. I'd like to make 2 points. Luke 22, verse 63. And the men that held Jesus mocked him and smote him. The men that held Jesus were probably the temple police. Prisoners were considered to be under the protection of the law. No one had the right to hit or hurt the prisoner according to the law, but it seemed that the temple police had their own law. They openly mocked him and struck him. Luke 22, verse 64. And when they had blindfolded him, they struck him on the face and asked him, saying, Prophesy, who is it that smote thee? And many other things blasphemously spake they against him. Blindfolding Jesus and striking him was a very cruel thing to do. When one can see a blow coming, there is a natural reflex action to move the body to cushion the blow. The quarterback is sometimes injured when blindsided. So Jesus was hit full force without using his natural reflex action. Jesus before Caiaphas. I'd like to cover 3 points. Luke 22, verse 66. And as soon as it was day, the elders of the people, the chief priests, and the scribes came together, and led him into their council, saying, in Greek, Sanhedrin means council or assembly. There are 2 Sanhedrins, the Great and the Lesser. The Great Sanhedrin was like a supreme court. It consisted of 71 judges. They met in the temple in Jerusalem. Caiaphas, the high priest, presided. The rest were made up of the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the scribes, the chief priests, and elders. The Lesser Council consisted of 23 judges. The Lesser Sanhedrin was appointed for each city. A chief priest presided. Note that it was illegal to try capital charges so early in the morning. Luke 22, verse 67, saying, Art thou the Christ? Tell us. And he said unto them, If I tell you, ye will not believe. And if I also ask you, ye will not answer me, nor let me go. It didn't matter what Jesus said. The Sanhedrin had already made up their minds. If Jesus said he was the Messiah, they wouldn't believe him. If he said he was not the Messiah, they already knew that. And if Jesus asked them questions, they would not answer him. They had already made up their minds to kill him because of his popularity. Matthew 26, verse 59. Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false witness against Jesus to put him to death. What a perversion of justice! They first resolved to ruin Jesus, but needed the proper means of effecting it. They declared him a criminal and needed to fix some crime upon him. It seemed that the common custom was to employ false witnesses. The false witnesses. I'd like to cover 3 points. Mark 14, verse 56. For many bear false witness against him, but their witness agree not together. The normal practice in Jewish law was to charge a criminal, listen to the witnesses, and based on their testimony, come up with a verdict. The criminal had no voice in his defense. To date, the charges against Jesus were healing on the Sabbath, threatening to destroy the temple, practicing sorcery, exorcising people by the power of demons, claiming to be the Messiah, Christ, claiming to be the Son of God. The testimony of many witnesses is contradictory, and thus could not be used in a formal charge. King James uses, their witness agreed not together. Other translations are, and their testimony did not agree, and so their testimonies were not consistent, but their statements did not agree, and their testimony did not agree, but they contradicted each other. Matthew 26, verse 60c. At the last came 2 false witnesses. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another made without hands. But neither so did their witness agree together. The false witnesses misunderstood Jesus. Jesus answered and said unto them, Destroy this temple in 3 days, and I will raise it up. Then said the Jews, 46 years was the temple in building, and wilt thou rear it up in 3 days? But he spake of the temple of his body. Jesus was predicting his resurrection. Even such a misrepresentative and malicious garbling of Jesus' words was useless, and the 2 witnesses could not agree on the accusation. There was no coherent account of such an alleged statement. One witness said one thing, another said something else. Mark 14, verse 60. And the high priest stood up in the midst, and asked Jesus, saying, Answerest thou nothing? What is it which these witnesses against thee? But he held his peace and answered nothing. Caiaphas found the judgment seat uncomfortable. He abandoned the legal system. He took on the role of prosecutor and started asking Jesus to account for himself against these witnesses. But Jesus simply kept quiet and said nothing. Are you the Christ, the Son of God? I'd like to cover 3 points. Matthew 26, verse 63b. And the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee, by the living God, that thou tell us whether you be the Christ, the Son of God, the Son of the Blessed. And Jesus said, I am. In sheer frustration that the witnesses were not in agreement, Caiaphas became the prosecutor of the case and questioned Jesus directly. This was not lawful. Caiaphas put Jesus under oath. He asked Jesus if he is the Christ, the Son of God, to which Jesus simply replied, I am. Matthew 26, verse 64b. Nevertheless, I say unto you, hereafter shall you see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Acts 7, verse 55. But he, being full of the Holy Ghost, looked up steadfastly into heaven, and saw the glory of God, and Jesus standing on the right hand of God, and said, Behold, I see the heavens open, and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of God. Romans 8:34. Who is he that condemneth? Is it Christ that died? Yea, rather, that he has risen again, who even at the right hand of God, who also makes intercession for us. Colossians 3, verse 1. And if ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. And coming in the clouds of heaven. Daniel 7, verse 13a. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven. Acts 1, verse 10. And while they looked steadfastly towards heaven, as he went up, behold, 2 men stood by them in white apparel, which also said, Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven. The verdict of the Sanhedrin. I'd like to cover 3 points. Matthew 26, verse 65. Then the high priest rent his clothes, saying, He has spoken blasphemy. What further need have we of witnesses? Behold, now ye have heard his blasphemy. Caiaphas could not believe his ears. Jesus claimed to be the Son of God. He also claimed to be the Son of Man, as foretold by Daniel. And Jesus used the I Am name for God, which was forbidden. Caiaphas was so emotionally upset that he tore his clothes. Matthew 26, verse 66. What think ye? They answered and said, He is guilty of death. Blasphemy, dishonoring God, was a capital offense punishable by stoning. The Sanhedrin had rules about executing the verdict. It had to be done the next day. But the next day was the high Sabbath day, so they could not wait and had to execute the verdict that day. Matthew 26, verse 67. Then did they spit in his face and buffeted him, and others smote him with the palms of their hands. And the servants did strike him with the palms of their hands. Jesus gave the full confession of his identity. But to Jews, there is only one and only one true God. There is no Son of God, which is an insult to the true God. And for such an insult, they spit on Jesus and beat him up in anger. Even the servants took part in the mockery and beating. Thank you so very much for watching this video regarding how to read the 4 Gospels horizontally and the Bible study on Jesus before the Sanhedrin. Amen.